Chapter 1. The air in Southampton smelled of saltpeter and a promise I hadn't asked for. My parents, with a gleam of desperation in their eyes, adjusted my threadbare wool coat for the 1,000th time. "Elizabeth, it's our only chance," my father repeated, his voice barely a whisper of the conviction he tried to project. They had sold the little land we owned, the furniture passed down through generations, even Flossie the cow, to buy these third-class tickets on the Titanic. It wasn't a voyage, it was a leap into the void financed with the sweat of a lifetime. For them, America was the promised land. For me, a gilded cage that tore me away from the only thing I knew. I looked around, searching the crowd that thronged the dock. Every face was a stranger, every voice a distant echo. Except for one. Jack's absence was a physical blow. He had promised to be there, even if it was for one last goodbye, one last look that would be seared into my soul. But there was no trace of her unruly hair, of her cheeky smile that always managed to dispel the fog of my melancholy. Despair gripped my throat tighter than the knot in my handkerchief. The Titanic loomed, a mountain of steel and broken dreams for me. People shoved each other, a human tide swept along by anticipation. My father, with iron determination, urged us forward. "Come on, Elizabeth, we can't miss the boarding." Every step toward the gangplank was another nail in the coffin of my hope. I was leaving behind not only my home, but the possibility of a future with Jack. A future that, unlike this floating colossus, felt real and tangible. The steam from the smokestacks mingled with the breath of the crowd, a symphony of farewells and longings. I heard only the echo of an unfulfilled promise. "I promised to find you," Jack had told me, his eyes shining with that spark of madness that attracted me so much. But promises, like ships, sometimes sank before setting sail. I gripped the handrail, feeling the cold wood beneath my fingers. Was this the end, the final goodbye to everything that mattered? Once on board, the contrast between the ostentation of first class and the modesty of third class was overwhelming. We passed through corridors decorated with polished wood and velvet before being confined to the aft section. Our cabin, barely larger than a closet, smelled of new wood and claustrophobia. My parents tried to instill optimism, pointing to the small window overlooking the deck, as if that would compensate for the suffocation of reality. For them, America was the promised land. For me, a gilded cage that tore me away from the only thing I knew. I tried to maintain my composure, but my heart pounded with the fury of a storm. With every passing minute, the distance between Jack and me grew insurmountable. How could a penniless man, a street artist with more dreams than possessions, cross an ocean for me? It was a fantasy, a consolation I'd clung to survive the past few days. The harsh truth was a shock. Dinner in the third-class dining room was a somber affair. The other passengers' conversations about their hopes for the new world seemed empty, hollow. All I could think about was the pier, the hole Jack had left in my heart. Had he forgotten me already? Had our story been just a fleeting interlude in her bohemian life? The thought cut through me like an icy knife. After dinner, I slipped to the top deck, gasping for air, searching for a sign. The sea wind whipped around my face, and the lights of Southampton faded on the horizon. The ship, majestic and relentless, was moving toward the unknown. I leaned on the railing, feeling the rumble of the engines beneath my feet. A single tear slid down my cheek, salty like the sea that separated us. Suddenly, a voice, unmistakable, echoed behind me. You thought you'd be rid of me so easily, eh, Elizabeth? My heart stopped. I turned slowly, fearing it was an illusion, a trick of my eager mind. But there he was, Jack, his figure silhouetted against the lights of the harbor that were now almost disappearing. Her smile, the same one I had imagined 1,000 times, illuminating the darkness of my despair. He approached, his eyes shining with a mixture of triumph and madness. He wore the same shabby coat as always, but his posture was different, more upright, defiant. "I wasn't going to let this hulk of steel take you without me," he said, his voice husky with emotion. I couldn't get a word out. The shock had taken my breath away, left me powerless. How? How had he managed to be here? My eyes scanned his face, searching for an explanation, a sign that I wasn't dreaming. "But how?" I managed to stammer. He laughed, a sound that was music to my ears. "A lucky hand, a couple of clever bluffs, and voila," he said, waving a hand as if by magic. "A ticket to third class, courtesy of a gentleman with more money than brains." A game of cards. Only Jack could have done it. Joy flooded me, sweeping away the fear and sadness that had gripped me. I threw myself into his arms, the most longed-for embrace of my life. The scent of tobacco and freedom enveloped me, dispelling the oppression of the ship. Fate didn't matter. My parents' sacrifice didn't matter. With Jack here, on this gigantic vessel, the future, at last, felt uncertain, but full of a promise I longed for. We broke apart slightly, his hands on my cheeks, his thumbs caressing my skin. "I knew you'd come," I whispered, my voice cracking with emotion. He smiled, and in his eyes I saw the reflection of my own love. In that moment, on the deck of the Titanic, with the vast ocean as my witness, I convinced myself that despite everything, fate had brought us together again. I didn't know that same promise would soon be undone. Chapter 2. The shock of seeing Jack on board was a whirlwind that swept away the exhaustion and despair. We hid in a corner of the deck, the harbor lights now a distant memory, and spoke in whispers. His story was a madness worthy of him. He had won passage in a poker game, fleecing a drunken tycoon in a port dive. "I had to get to you, Lizzie," he told me, using the nickname that only he could pronounce with that mix of tenderness and mischief. The urgency in his eyes mirrored mine. The hours slipped by as we shared the details of our last days apart. He, struggling for every penny, painting portraits on the street. I, caught between resignation and disbelief that my life would change so drastically. Jack was outraged to hear of my parents' sacrifice. "They sold everything. For what? To lock you in a gilded cage in America?" His voice rose a little, and I had to silence him. His passion was his greatest virtue, and sometimes his downfall. Night stretched over the Atlantic, a dark blanket dotted with indifferent stars. We clung to each other as if physical contact could make up for lost time and the uncertainty of the future. He told me about his dreams, of traveling the world with a brush and canvas, of living without ties. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to dream with him, beyond the expectations of my parents and the walls of third class. The early morning chill forced us to seek shelter. Jack didn't have an assigned cabin, which added a layer of precariousness to his already precarious presence on board. "I'll manage," he assured me with his usual aplomb. "The ship is big. I'm sure I'll find some corner to sneak into." My heart sank. The gap between our worlds, despite his miraculous appearance, remained abysmal. I returned to my cabin, euphoria mixed with a latent anxiety. My parents were fast asleep, oblivious to the drama unfolding in my life. I lay down, but sleep wouldn't come. Jack's presence, so real and yet so impossible, kept me on edge. What would happen now? How could we keep this a secret on such an immense yet closely watched ship? The following days passed in a kind of clandestine reverie. We met secretly on deck, in less traveled corners, on the service stairs. Each encounter was a theft of time, a moment of pure bliss. Jack taught me to see the ship through different eyes. It wasn't just a floating prison, but a microcosm of stories, of lives that intersected and diverged. He mingled with the crew, with the other third-class passengers, even with some of the second-class passengers. His natural charisma opened doors for him. He spoke to me of a future together, far from the expectations of my family, the limitations of his poverty and mine. We dreamed of a small studio in Paris, of days filled with art and nights under the stars. His words were a balm for my soul, an escape from reality. One day, as we strolled through the third-class deck, Jack suddenly stopped. His gaze fell on something, or rather, someone. I followed his gaze. A woman, tall, slender, with an aristocratic bearing that screamed first class. Her reddish hair was elegantly tied back, her eyes a piercing blue. I saw her smile, a smile that didn't seem sincere, but rehearsed. My heart lurched uncomfortably. "Wow," Jack murmured, almost to himself. "That's Miss DeWitt Bukater. I've seen her around here a couple of times." Her voice held a curious note I didn't like. She was the embodiment of everything I wasn't, of a world I'd never belonged to. A pang of jealousy, cold and unpleasant, coursed through me. Jack, oblivious to my discomfort, continued to watch her. "They say she's engaged to Cal Hockley, the steel magnate," he commented, as if it were an interesting anecdote. The information weighed heavily on me. She was untouchable, unattainable. Why was she so interesting to him? "Come on," I said, tugging on his arm more tightly than necessary. He turned, his smile a little forced. That night, the image of the woman pierced my thoughts. There was something about the way Jack looked at her, a flicker of fascination that unsettled me. I'd always been his center of attention, his muse. Could a high society woman, with her elegance and mystery, overshadow the connection we'd worked so hard to forge? The question nodded at me. Chapter 3. The days that followed became an uneasy dance between the joy of having Jack by my side and the growing shadow of Rose's presence. I saw her often on deck, always immaculate, always surrounded by that aura of privilege. And what worried me more, Jack seemed to frequently encounter her as well. At first, I attributed it to chance, to the ship's limited size. But the chance began to feel more orchestrated. Our encounters became furtive, not only because of the risk of being discovered by my parents or the crew, but also because of a new unspoken tension between Jack and me. He was still the same, spontaneous, passionate, full of life. But sometimes a distraction, a distant thought crossed his eyes. Once, while sketching me in his notebook, his gaze wandered over the horizon, and I swore a different gleam appeared as an elegant figure passed by the first-class gangway. I refused to confront him. The fear of the answer, of the confirmation of my worst fears, was too great. I preferred uncertainty to the hurtful truth. Yet the seed of doubt had already been planted. I remembered every small interaction, every casual mention of the lady in red or the girl who paints. The nickname stuck in my throat. One afternoon, I found him on the foredeck, a place that had become our refuge. He was sitting, his notebook open, but he wasn't drawing me. My heart leapt. He bolted upright when he saw me, putting the notebook away with unusual swiftness. "Lizzie, I didn't expect you so soon," he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "What were you drawing?" I asked, my voice higher than I'd intended. He hesitated for a moment. "Just some ideas, ship stuff, the architecture." His explanation rang hollow. I knew him too well. He drew life, emotions, not the coldness of steel. A part of me wanted to snatch the notebook from him, but my pride prevented me. The conversation flowed, or rather, it was forced. We talked about our plans in America, about the dreams we had shared just a few days before, but the magic had faded a little. There was an invisible barrier between us, built by my suspicions and his avoidance. I felt like an intruder in my own story, a stranger in the life of the man I loved. The day of betrayal, if I can call it that, arrived brutally. I was looking for Jack for our usual meeting, but I couldn't find him in any of our secret places. Unease was eating away at me. I decided to take a risk and go to one of the upper decks near the first class area, a place Jack sometimes explored out of his insatiable curiosity. And I saw them. I can't describe the blow, the icy stab that pierced my chest. They were at the bow, in the same place where Jack had promised me a future. Rose, her hair flying in the wind, her laughter echoing in the air. And Jack. He was holding her by the waist, his head close to hers, his eyes fixed on hers. This wasn't a simple conversation. This wasn't an innocent friendship. It was intimacy. It was betrayal. The world seemed to stop. The roar of the ocean, the murmur of the wind, everything fell silent. I only heard the frantic beat of my own heart, a runaway drum of pain and fury. I hid behind a bulkhead, unable to tear my eyes away. I saw them laugh. I saw them share a look heavy with complicity, a look I thought was shared only with me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run toward them, but my feet were anchored to the ground, my voice caught in my throat. Shame consumed me, a burning shame that I had been so blind, so naive. All the signs, all the doubts suddenly made sense. Jack's curiosity, his avoidance, the hidden notebook, it all fit into a devastating pattern. They broke away slightly, and Rose looked at Jack with an admiration that left no room for doubt. He said something to her, and she nodded, her face alight. What kind of secrets were they sharing? What kind of promises were they making while I waited in the darkness of a lower deck? The irony was cruel. I had crossed an ocean for him, and he had abandoned me for another, aboard the very ship that had brought us together. I walked away soundlessly, my soul shattered. There were no tears, only cold rage and profound desolation. The hidden passion of our reunion had turned into a burning betrayal. Jack was torn between two loves, and I, Elizabeth, was the loser. The story I had dreamed of, the future we had built in whispers, crumbled before my eyes in the vastness of the Atlantic. Chapter 4. The betrayal left a bitter taste in my mouth that no food in the third-class dining room could disguise. I spent the next few days like a ghost on board, avoiding Jack at all costs. The mere thought of his face, of his smile that now seemed like a mask, made my stomach churn. My parents noticed my pallor and silence, attributing it to seasickness or homesickness. I couldn't tell them the truth. Their sacrifice was already too heavy to bear my love sorrows. Jack, for his part, tried to get closer. I saw him looking for me on the deck, lurking in the corridors we knew I frequented. But I hid, strayed, sank into the shadows. I couldn't face him, not yet. The wound was too fresh, the pain too sharp. Every time our paths almost crossed, my heart sank, not with longing, but with a mixture of repulsion and hopelessness. One afternoon, he intercepted me. I couldn't escape. He pinned me against the railing, his eyes pleading, his voice barely a whisper. "Elizabeth, what's wrong? You've been avoiding me for days." I didn't respond. My gaze was fixed on the horizon, on the indifferent waves surrounding us. "I know something's wrong. Please tell me." His hand sought mine, but I pulled back as if burned. "I saw it, Jack," I finally blurted out, my voice icy. "I saw you with her." His face fell, the mask of innocence slipping away, revealing a mixture of shock and guilt. There was a thick silence between us, broken only by the waves crashing against the boat's hull. The icy afternoon wind was nothing compared to the chill in my chest. "Elizabeth, I can explain," he began, his voice sounding like a cheap excuse. "It's not what you think." I looked at him, and the suppressed rage erupted. "Oh, isn't it? Isn't that what I think? Seeing you alone with her, laughing, whispering, touching her, isn't that what I think?" My words were knives, and I savored the pain I saw reflected in his eyes. He was the one to blame. He must feel it. He tried to justify himself, babbling something about being just friends, about she needed someone to talk to. The hypocrisy revolted me. Friends? I had given him my heart, my future, and he had trampled on it for a high society fling. Don't lie to me, Jack. Not now. What we had was real, wasn't it? Or was I the only one who felt it? His silence was the most resounding response. He lowered his gaze, unable to sustain my intensity. And in that instant, I knew it was over. There was no going back. The connection we had forged, that spark of madness and passion, had been extinguished, smothered by an unforgivable betrayal. The man who had defied fate for me now looked at me with the guilt of a caught thief. "Go away, Jack," I said, my voice now devoid of emotion, empty. "Go back to your friend. She's from your new world, isn't she? The high society, the luxuries, everything you always wanted, even if you wouldn't admit it." His eyes widened, hurt by my words, but I felt no compassion. My own dreams, my hopes were shattered. He left, and for the first time, his back seemed small and defeated. I didn't look for him anymore. I promised myself I would erase him from my mind, that I would tear every memory of him from my heart. But love, like the roots of an old tree, holds on with an unsuspected strength. Anger, in time, would transform into a deep sadness, one that wouldn't heal easily. That night, the chill of the Atlantic intensified. I felt as if the ship, majestic and powerful, was a metaphor for my own life, a journey filled with crumbling promises, with an iceberg of looming pain. My parents still dreamed of America, and I, heartbroken, prepared for an empty life, stripped of love and hope. Innocence was gone. Chapter 5. The atmosphere on the ship changed drastically with the arrival of nightfall on April 14th. An unusual chill seeped through the cracks in the decks beyond the simple sea air. My heart, though still aching for Jack, sensed a tension in the air, a restlessness that wasn't just mine. The crew seemed more alert, and rumors that we had received iceberg warnings began to circulate among the third-class passengers like a disturbing murmur. My parents, oblivious to the growing concern, retired early to bed, exhausted by the excitement of the voyage and the hopes of their new life. I, however, couldn't sleep. The image of Jack with Rose repeated itself in my mind over and over again, torturing me. I got up and looked out the small cabin window. The darkness was almost absolute, broken only by the distant lights of the ship. The ocean, once a promise of freedom, now felt like an abyss. Suddenly, a dull thud and a shudder ran through the ship. It wasn't a violent impact, not like a head-on collision, but more of a rumble, a deep tremor that made the ground vibrate beneath my feet. It lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to wake my parents. "What was that?" my mother exclaimed, her voice filled with concern. My father stood up, his face revealing confusion. "I don't know," I replied, feeling a knot in my stomach. The ship, which until that moment had felt invincible, now seemed vulnerable. A tense silence fell over the cabin, broken only by the creaking of steel. A few minutes later, the ship stopped. The constant drone of the engines, which had become an imperceptible part of life on board, ceased. The silence was deafening, ominous. My father, a practical and cautious man, decided to go out and investigate. "We'd better see what's going on. Maybe it's a mechanical problem." My mother and I waited for him, our hearts pounding. The minutes dragged on, and uncertainty suffocated us. Voices could be heard in the corridor, a growing murmur of concern that spread through the third-class section. When my father returned, his face was pale. "They say we've brushed against an iceberg," he said, his voice choked. "But it's not serious. We'll be back on track in a moment." His words were intended to reassure us, but his expression betrayed his unease. He had seen the concern in others' eyes. Perhaps he had heard more than he was telling us. The air grew colder in the cabin. Shortly after, the crew began issuing orders. First, the men in third class were asked to come up on deck. My father reluctantly obeyed. "I'll be back soon," he promised, but there was an urgency in his eyes that chilled my blood. Then the order extended to the women and children. "Everyone on deck, please. This is a precautionary measure." The third-class evacuation was a contained chaos. It lacked the calm of the upper decks. People shoved each other, scared, confused. I heard mothers comforting their children, men arguing about the best route. My mother, clinging to my arm, tried to follow the instructions, but the doors and stairwells seemed designed to hinder our passage. The priority, it was clear, wasn't us. The cold grew more intense, and as I stepped onto the deck, I saw the iceberg for the first time. A colossal mass of ice, ghostly white under the moon, loomed ominously in the darkness. It wasn't a simple graze, I knew instantly. That silent giant had left a mortal wound in the ship's side. Fear, real and tangible, filled me. It wasn't just Jack's betrayal anymore. It was the threat of death itself. The ship's tilt became noticeable. At first, almost imperceptible, then more pronounced. People were grabbing whatever they could, and some were beginning to panic. The image of Jack with Rose returned to my mind, but this time with a different pang. Are they all okay in their luxurious first-class cabins? Or would tragedy engulf us all, rich and poor, betrayed and traitor? Amid the chaos, I heard a familiar voice. I turned, and through the crowd that was beginning to push toward the lifeboats, I saw Jack. His face was marked by concern, his eyes scanning the crowd desperately. He was searching for me. My heart, despite everything, raced. The irony of the situation was brutal. On the brink of death, the only person I wanted by my side was the man who had broken my heart. Chapter 6. The sight of Jack searching for me in the terrified crowd hit me with a wave of conflicting emotions. The rage lingered, but a part of me, that primal part that yearns for survival, felt a glimmer of relief. Did it mean he cared, or was it just the desperation of the moment? I didn't have time to decipher it. The chaos on deck was increasing, and the ship's list was becoming more pronounced. The shouts of officers urging people into the lifeboats mingled with the cries of children and the prayers of the desperate. Women and children first, they shouted, but the reality was different for the third class. The doors leading to the lifeboats seemed closed to us, controlled by an overwhelmed and sometimes cruel crew. Terror set in. My parents and I were caught in the current of people, pushed out of control. The cold was unbearable, and the icy water was already lapping at the edges of the lower deck. I saw a mother separated from her child in the stampede, their screams echoing in the air. The scene was dantesque, a frozen hell in the middle of the Atlantic. Suddenly, a firm hand grabbed me. It was Jack. His eyes, once filled with guilt, now held only fierce determination. "Elizabeth, we have to get out of here," he shouted over the din. His grip was strong, protective. For an instant, the past was erased, and only the present existed, the imminent threat and its presence. My parents, seeing Jack, froze. My father, a man who prided himself on his level-headedness, tried to intervene. "Stay away from my daughter, boy," he snapped, despite the urgency of the moment. But Jack wouldn't let go. "There's no time for this. The ship is sinking." His voice was that of reason, of survival. He led us with a boldness I hadn't known before, weaving his way through the crowd. We climbed emergency stairs, slipped through maze-like corridors. Jack knew the shortcuts, the cracks in the ship that third-class passengers learned to use out of necessity. My mother, despite her fear, followed him, understanding that our only hope lay with him. We reached an upper deck where the scene was even more chaotic. Lifeboats were being lowered frantically into the water, many still half empty. The officers tried to maintain order, but panic was an untamable beast. "We have to get on a lifeboat," my father shouted, his voice cracking with frustration. That's when I saw her again, Rose. She was at the railing, not far from us, her gaze lost in the darkness. Beside her, the man she was going to marry, Cal, was trying to drag her toward a lifeboat. It sounded like an argument. My heart sank. The irony was brutal. Jack had betrayed me for her, and now everyone's life hung in the balance. Jack pushed me behind a group of people. "Stay here, Elizabeth. Don't leave your parents' side." Then, without another word, he headed toward Rose. I watched him walk toward her, his determination unwavering. My mind clouded with confusion. Was I going to save her, the woman he'd abandoned me for? A wave of pain and despair washed over me. My parents held me, trying to keep me safe, but my eyes were fixed on Jack. I watched him speak to Rose, his body language urgent. Then he took her hand and dragged her, not toward a boat, but to another part of the deck. My confusion grew. What was he doing? Was he putting his own life in danger for her? The ship's list became so severe that walking became nearly impossible. The bow sank rapidly, and the stern rose into the night sky. The screams of people falling into the icy water were heartbreaking. The horror was real, tangible. The boats that had been launched were drifting away, leaving hundreds of damned souls behind. Suddenly, a terrible roar. The ship was breaking apart. The sound of twisting metal was the wail of a dying giant. Panic turned to hysteria. People were running aimlessly, jumping into the void. My father, with a strength he didn't know he possessed, pushed me into a gap, a last desperate attempt to protect me. "Stay here, Elizabeth. Whatever happens, stay." Chapter 7. The roar of the Titanic splitting in two was a sound that pierced my soul and seared itself into my memory. The creaking of steel twisting under the immense pressure echoed like the wail of a wounded beast. The stern of the ship rose skyward, a towering silhouette against the darkness, while the bow sank with terrifying rapidity. The world tilted. My parents had shoved me into a narrow alcove, a space between some lumps in a wall, a desperate attempt to protect me from the chaos unfolding around us. I was trapped, but, for an instant, safe from the human maelstrom. From my hiding place, I watched my father struggle to stay on his feet, clutching the railing, while my mother, her eyes wide with terror, tried not to fall. The screams of the people plunging into the icy water were heartbreaking. Bodies falling from above, impacts against steel, the final splash in the icy Atlantic. The horror was so palpable that I felt the chill of death even from my precarious shelter. My own lungs burned with the effort of not screaming. My gaze, despite my panic, searched for Jack. Where was he? What had become of him and Rose? Last time, I'd seen him dragging her, away from the boats, away from Cal. Why? The question pierced me, a cruel irony in the midst of the catastrophe. Would he save her and leave me? The possibility chilled my blood more than the seawater. The ship moved with violent spasms. Each creak was a blow to my chest. I heard my mother scream my name, her voice filled with a desperation I'd never heard from her before. I tried to respond. I tried to free myself from my confinement, but the bulks protecting me also immobilized me. I saw my parents struggling against the tilt, trying to get closer, their faces distorted with fear. Suddenly, a sharp movement. The stern rose almost vertically. The people around me began to slide across the deck like broken dolls. My parents, with a strangled cry, let go of the railing and fell, dragged down by the inertia of the sinking. "Mother! Father!" I shouted, my voice drowned by panic and the roar. I watched them disappear into the darkness, devoured by the maelstrom of bodies and debris. The image of their fall was seared into my mind, an indelible scar. I felt an immense emptiness, not only from their loss, but from the helplessness. I couldn't do anything. I was trapped, watching my world disintegrate before my eyes. The hope they had instilled in me, the sacrifice they had made, everything sank with them. Water began to pour through the hole where I was, an icy stream that soaked me instantly. The level rose rapidly. The cold numbed my senses, but reality was a constant slap in the face. The ship, my prison, and my destiny would become my tomb. Death, which until that moment had been a distant concept, now breathed down my neck. I fought with my last strength. I pushed against the bundles. I clawed at the wood, my mind in a frenzy to escape. But it was useless. The water rose mercilessly, and the space became smaller and smaller. Oxygen became scarce. Darkness surrounded me. There was no escape. And in that instant, in the gloom of the cabin as it filled with water, the image of Jack and Rose together assaulted me again. Rage, betrayal, pain. He had chosen her. He had saved her. And I, Elizabeth, the woman to whom he had promised eternal love, was sinking alone, abandoned, while the man I loved fought for another's life. The injustice was overwhelming. Chapter 8. Darkness became a gag. The icy water covered me up to my chest, and air was a rare commodity. Despair gripped me, not the despair of impending death, but that of loneliness. My parents were gone. Jack had abandoned me. I was alone, in the vastness of a dying ship, in the middle of a frigid ocean. My hands groped in the gloom. My fingers came across a familiar object, Something that had fallen from my luggage in the commotion, my small leather journal. It was Jack's gift, a notebook he'd given me when we promised we'd write our story, a record of our dreams and adventures. The irony was cruel. Now it would become the testament to my desolation. With numb fingers and my heart pounding like a funeral drum, I reached for my pen. It was in the inside pocket of my coat, soaked but still functional. There was no time, there was no hope, but there was an overwhelming need to leave a trace, a truth that would transcend my death. April 15th, 1912. I wrote with a trembling hand, the ink running slightly on the damp paper. The Titanic is sinking. My parents are gone. I saw them fall. I am trapped in the cabin. The water is rising. Each word was a pang, but also a release. It was my last voice, my last act of resistance. I thought of Jack, of his smile, of his promises, of his hands that had traced my face, and then of Rose, of the betrayal I had witnessed, the abandonment I was now experiencing. Rage and pain mingled in my veins. I had to write it down. I had to record the truth, not only of the tragedy of the ship, but of the tragedy of my heart. Jack, he's on board. I saw him. He looked for me. For a moment, I thought maybe he still cared. But no, I saw him with her, with Rose, the lady from first class. He chose her. He fought for her. He left me. He left me to die here, alone, while he saved someone else. The pen slid with more anger, the words a torrent of bitterness. The water was already up to my neck. Every movement of the ship sent a shiver through me. Objects floated around me. The sound of water flooding the cabin was the soundtrack to my end. The oxygen was growing thicker, heavier. My consciousness was beginning to waver. I always believed our love was stronger than poverty, than class, than fate. I was a fool. He used me. I was just a passing fling, another bohemian moment in his life before he found his true desire in luxury and position. My words were harsh, perhaps unfair in my agony, but they were my truth at that moment. I clung to the journal with all my strength, as if it were a lifeline. I knew it wasn't, but if my body sank, at least my words could float, telling my story, my love, my betrayal. It was a vain hope, I knew, but it gave me purpose in my final moments. The water is icy cold. I can't feel my fingers anymore. The ship is listing too much. My heart is broken, more broken than the ship. If anyone finds this, let them know that Elizabeth loved with all her being and was abandoned. The pen stopped. My strength was failing. Darkness claimed me. Jack, I loved you. I could barely scribble the last words. The ink blurred into a single tear. The cold enveloped me completely. The journal slipped from my fingers, falling into the water. The last breath of hope was fading. The story of Elizabeth, the third-class girl who found love and betrayal on the Titanic, sank with her, leaving only the echo of a broken heart and the faint hope that somehow her words would endure. The water covered me. The world went black. The Titanic, my grave. The roar of the Titanic splitting in two was a sound that pierced my soul and seared itself into my memory. The creaking of steel twisting under the immense pressure echoed like the wail of a wounded beast. The stern of the ship rose skyward, a towering silhouette against the darkness, while the bow sank with terrifying swiftness. The world tilted, and I, Elizabeth, was still trapped in the hollow where my parents had pushed me. My parents. I had seen them fall, swept away by the maelstrom of the tilted deck. Their screams still rang in my ears, an echo of despair that chilled my blood more than the water already lapping at my ankles. They had sacrificed everything, sold every last penny so that I would have a future in America. And now that future vanished into the icy abyss, taking their dreams and their lives with it. Guilt ate at me, a burden heavier than the debris surrounding me. The water rose mercilessly. Each stream that seeped through the cracks in the cabin was a brutal reminder that my time was running out. The cold was unbearable, numbing my limbs, but my mind refused to give in. I thought of Jack, of how he had run to Rose, how he had dragged her away from the boats, saving her, while I, the woman he had promised a world to, sank alone in the darkness. There was no sign of Jack, nor of his friend. The ship was a tomb, and the certainty that he had survived with her, that he had chosen his life over mine, was a final stab. Injustice was a poison coursing through my veins. I had loved with all my being, and love had returned betrayal and abandonment at the hour of my death. I fought with my last strength. I pushed at the lumps that kept me trapped, scraped the metal walls with my numb fingers, but it was useless. The space grew smaller, the oxygen denser. Darkness surrounded me, a suffocating blanket claiming me. The sounds of the ship disintegrating around me were the symphony of my end. The pain of betrayal and loss mingled with physical despair. My legs buckled, exhaustion a crushing burden. My eyes closed for a moment, and in the inner darkness I saw their faces. My parents, full of hope, and Jack's, filled with that smile that now seemed like a cruel mockery. No, I wouldn't leave without leaving my truth behind. My hands groped in the gloom. My fingers found the familiar object, soaked but still there. My leather journal, Jack's gift, my silent confidant. Now it would become my epitaph, my final confession, a trace of my existence for a world that would soon forget me. With a superhuman effort, with the water already covering me up to my chest, I managed to find the quill pen. It was wet, but the ink, although slightly smudged, still flowed. Breathing became increasingly difficult, each breath a sacrifice. My consciousness was beginning to waver, but the need to write, to leave my testimony, was stronger than the fear of death. April 15th, 1912, I scribbled with a trembling hand, the writing blurring slightly on the damp paper. The Titanic is sinking. My parents are gone. I watch them fall. I'm trapped in the cabin, the water rising mercilessly. Each word was a release, a final act of resistance against annihilation. I thought of Jack again, of the bitter irony of it all. Jack, he's on board. I saw him. He looked for me. For a moment I thought maybe he still cared. But no, I saw him with her, with Rose, the lady from first class. He chose her. He saved her. He left me. He left me to die here, alone, while he fights for another's life. The ink darkened with rage, the words a torrent of pain and accusation. The cold was unbearable, an icy embrace that numbed me. I could no longer feel my fingers, my feet were inert. Objects floated around me in the darkness, creating a macabre dance. The sound of water flooding the cabin was the last song I would ever hear. I knew the end was near. Resignation mingled with a pang of relief. I always believed our love was stronger than poverty, than class, than fate. I was a fool. He used me. I was just a passing fling, another bohemian in his life before he found his true desire in luxury and position. My words were harsh, perhaps unfair in my agony, but they were my truth in that moment, the only truth I had left. I clung to the journal with the last bit of strength I had, as if it were a lifeline. It wasn't, I knew, but if my body sank into the depths, at least my words could float, tell my story, my love, my betrayal. It was a vain hope, I knew, but it gave me a purpose in my final moments. It was Elizabeth's last spark. The water is icy cold. I can't feel my fingers anymore. The ship is listing too much. My heart is broken, more broken than this ship. If anyone finds this, let them know that Elizabeth loved with all her being, and she was abandoned. The pen stopped. My strength was failing. The darkness claimed me. I'm so tired. The cold, the grief. I can't take it anymore. With the last breath, I dropped the journal into the water, closing my eyes. I settled into the wet, unmade bed, feeling the chill of the soaked sheets. The boat was listing more, its creaking sounds its final death throes. Darkness enveloped me completely. I can't write anymore. I'm cold. Jack, where are you?